So with respect to children,
Yeah.
the nature of your relationship with the other parent has got nothing to do with the obligations and entitlements that you might have. Whether you're in a married relationship, a long-term unmarried relationship, or you met somebody after the bar one night, it's got nothing to do with your rights and obligations. If you are the parent of a child, you, without a doubt, have an obligation to pay child support, including if you are the child with the parent with whom the child normally lives. You just provide your support in different ways, non-material ways that don't involve writing a check every month. So the nature of your relationship with the other parent has got nothing to do with your obligation to pay or your entitlement to receive child support. On the other hand, spousal support can change from province to province, right? Most provinces, except for Quebec, extend an entitlement to spousal support to people involved in long-term unmarried relationships. And like I said, that was something that got rolling in the 1970s because it was part of government's recognition that unmarried relationships are increasing and increasingly important, and that sometimes they can have profound economic and social consequences when they break down. And so, in almost all jurisdictions, again, except for Quebec, there is some entitlement with respect to spousal support for people in unmarried relationships, exactly the same way it applies to people in married relationships.
Yeah, once you fall within the provincial definition of saying if you are in a cohabitation relationship that then ends, the obligation and right with respect to support will be the same as if you were married. It's just what's your threshold to get in there.
Yeah.
And actually the way it is in Ontario is if you are a spouse, if you have been living with in a cohabitation relationship with somebody for a period of more than 3 years, or if there's a child born of the relationship, even though you haven't been together for 3 years, if you're living together, then you do have the right to claim spousal support. Now, the interesting thing too that a lot of people aren't aware of is it doesn't have to be necessarily a child born of the relationship. If you've acted or stood in the place of a parent to a child, and it could be a child that you and your cohabitating partner have adopted together, it could be a child that your partner has brought in from a prior relationship, it could be any child that a parent is, that a person is treated as a child of their own. Once that a relationship is established, it doesn't matter what your marital status is with the other side. If you've created a relationship with a child, you have a responding obligation to support that child in the event your relationship with the child means you're no longer living with them and supporting them on a day-to-day basis as part of your household.
So let me just touch on something Helena brought up, which is about the threshold to qualify. So in law, the rights and entitlements that you have often depend on whether you meet a certain legal definition. For example, to apply for an order in the Divorce Act, well, you have to first be legally married, right? Most people don't argue about whether they're legally married or not. That's usually a given. But the threshold that you have to meet to have that status under whatever piece of legislation you look at changes depending on where you go. So federally speaking, most legislation that talks about common law partners only requires people to have lived together for 1 year. In Ontario, as Helena was saying, you have to have lived, cohabited together in a marriage-like relationship for 3 years in order to qualify for that status, or less if you've had a child together. In Alberta, the rule is that you have to have lived together for 3 years in an interdependent relationship, right? In British Columbia, the rule to qualify as an unmarried spouse is you have to have lived in a marriage-like relationship for at least 2 years. But like Ontario, you can sometimes have spousal status if you've had a child together within that period. So this is yet one more reason why it's so critical for you to understand the laws that apply to you in your particular province.
Right. And really, for the audience out there, one of the biggest flags to look out for is if you believe or somebody tells you, well, once you've lived together, and I'm assuming you're in Ontario, once you've lived together for 3 years, don't worry, you've got all the same rights as you do as if you were married. That's the big thing that they really, really need to start doing some research on their own and preferably get advice and information from a lawyer who practices family law in their jurisdiction.